If you were to name something famous from Yorkshire, aside from stainless steel and probably Sean Bean, you're likely to guess a Yorkshire pudding. Today, we're going to look at the history of a Yorkshire pudding and how I was always taught to make them as well. So we've got the oven preheating to 210 degrees and we've got 150 grams of flour. To start, we add 4 eggs to it. Now, Yorkshire puddings were originally called dripping puddings in 1737. This was in a publication called The Whole Duty of a Woman. In this recipe book, it called for you to add a mixture of melted butter, flour, milk and eggs and put that underneath a roasting joint, which would have usually been beef. This was done so that the juices from the joint would have dripped into the pudding mixture below. Now this was done to add flavour, but also because meat was quite hard to come by in poorer areas, and so when they did have meat, they really had to utilise all of it that they could. So they had to really utilise all the juices and all the excess things that came along with it. It wasn't, however, until 1747, 10 years later, did it get the famous name Yorkshire Pudding. This was thanks to a recipe book, the best-selling recipe book of the 1700s, called The Art of Cookery Made Simple, written by Hannah Glass. Now, the key to Yorkshire puddings, by the way, is to try and get all the lumps out. So what I'm going to do next is add in 200 millilitres of milk. I'm using semi-skimmed milk. However, I'm going to add in 100 first, and then when it gets a bit smoother, I'm going to add in the other 100 millilitres. Now, Hannah Glass may have called it a Yorkshire pudding for one of two reasons. It may have been referring to the higher costs of meat up north and in poorer regions, but it may have also been because it would have probably been roasted over a coal fire rather than a wood fire, as coal was obviously readily more available in these regions and would have provided a hotter temperature, thus making the Yorkshire puddings crispier than any other dripping pudding. So now I'm going to add the rest of the milk to make it much more of a smoother mixture. And then before I put it in, I'm putting in one of my own little twists. I've got a mixture of salt, sage and onion granules in here to make a sage and onion seasoned Yorkshire pudding. Now, every year on the first Sunday of every February since 2007 in England, Yorkshire Pudding Day is celebrated. However, it's celebrated on the 13th of October every year in the USA. However, they call it something slightly different in the USA. It's known as a Laplander, but it's more commonly known as a popover. This name first appeared in the 1850s in a recipe book, and it gets its name from the fact that the batter pops over the tin once it's being cooked, as Yorkshire puddings are often known to rise. So now I'm going to add the seasoning. Now, of course, one of the key things when you are cooking a Yorkshire pudding is to make sure that not only the batter is lump-free and nice and smooth, but also that you drizzle a little bit of oil that can take high heat into the tray before you add the mixture. I'm choosing sunflower oil. So when the oven's preheated, we're going to add about just under a teaspoon of sunflower oil to each of the little pots for this Yorkshire pudding batter to sit in so it can rise nice and well. So now the oven's preheated, what I'm going to do is put about a teaspoon of sunflower oil into each of the little pot where the Yorkshire pudding batter is going to go. Now this then needs to be put in and heated all the way through, and the reason we do this is so that way it rises nice and well. There's nothing worse than a flat, small Yorkshire pudding. Okay, so now I've put about a teaspoon of sunflower oil in. We're going to put these back into the oven so that way the oil can get nice and hot all the way through. And then once that's done, we're going to put in the batter. Now that the oil has been heated through properly, we're going to start adding the batter. Now a key thing when adding the batter is you only put it up about halfway, because of course Yorkshire puddings are meant to rise. And whilst you want big Yorkshire puddings, you don't want them about that big. So we're going to start by adding the batter to each of these. Now, Yorkshire puddings were originally served as a starter because meat, of course, was harder to come by and cost more. Thus, they wanted the guests to be much more full before starting the main course, as they wouldn't have had as much food really in the main course as they would have wanted. Of course, as well, Yorkshire puddings are traditionally served with gravy. Now, this recipe as well dates back to around the same time as it got its name, and this is because as well, gravy was traditionally made using the meat drippings as well. Now, ask anyone from Yorkshire, and the key to getting a good rise on Yorkshire puddings is making sure that you don't open the oven at all once you put the batter in there, because otherwise they fall a little bit flat. And the other thing, of course, is you want your Yorkshire puddings to be quite crispy. So we're going to leave these at 210 for about 25 minutes, and then we'll come back and hopefully see a lovely rise. So they've been cooking for 25 minutes now. Here's the moment of truth. Have they risen well? Oh yes, yes they have. Now they are some Yorkshire puddings right there. But the real test is how did they taste? So we'll wait for them to cool down and see what we think. Oh, they do look beautiful if I do say so myself. Also lovely and crispy as well. And they do sure taste good as well if I do say so myself. Now, there is plenty of food that originates from Yorkshire, such as parkin, and my personally favourite named Fat Rascal. But let's be honest, nothing beats a classic Yorkshire pudding.